big problem, is going through the Bay of Biscay.
Can't think of a ship that would be able to tackle the Bay of Biscay. At that point, I said that they were utterly deluded, and the phone call went
uncensored
not
right
long
here.
The AI, no, that really scares me.
It can be good and bad, and it obviously depends how people use it. But it does worry me that we're getting to the stage where we can't tell what's real.
I received about 300 messages from people telling me someone's died on your cruise.
The Sail Away Uncensored Cruise podcast.
Jamie, we are going to start with you. So you recently sailed on Margaritaville, or with Margaritaville, on their new ship, Islander.
That's correct.
So was it a hit or was it a miss?
I feel like my UK audience really wanted me to hate the experience. I don't know why, whether that's just a lack of knowledge, understanding about the brand. And I have to say it was a hit, a surprise hit. I really enjoyed the whole experience from embarkation. I was on board by exactly 8 minutes past 10 in the morning, which was incredible. Cabins ready by 1:30. All luggage was waiting for passengers by 1:30. Really friendly crew. The food was surprisingly good. Okay. The portions were huge. The ports of call, really vibrant, lively. The whole thing just really gelled. And I know some people thought it might be a little bit too in your face or over the top. And I would say to that, it absolutely was. Okay. And it just worked really well for me. It was so casual as well. This is going to upset people. I was wearing flip-flops and shorts to dinner, including at specialty dining. And I make no apology for that.
So people don't care on there then?
No.
It's the whole... the atmosphere, it's very relaxed.
It's the whole sort of Jimmy Buffett vibe. I don't know if you're aware. I always imagine Jay to be having a bit of a bop to some Jimmy Buffett country music,
Can't see no, I can't see it.
No. Okay, but the whole vibe, the minute you walk into the atrium, it's a flip-flop atrium. There's a huge oversized flip-flop in the atrium to remind you this is casual and this is your holiday and you should be holidaying your way as you see fit, as long as you don't impact negatively on anyone else.
Has the wacky Joe Farkas interior design been maintained?
Yeah, absolutely.
So is it a bit like Carnival Miracle, like the atrium?
Imagine Carnival Miracle with more of a beach vibe.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting though. I think Margaritaville, I don't know if you two agree as well, like the idea is that it's not the best line, it's the service isn't great, the food isn't great.
That is the reputation, and yeah, I can confirm the food was very good. I'm not even going to say which cruise lines the food was better than, but it would surprise some people. I do say it in the vlog. So yeah, it comes with reputation. Yeah. You can party if you want to on board, but you can find lots of chilled, relaxed areas as well. I like a little bit of both, and I found both. Something
I was going to ask you was, what was the muster drill like? Because I know when Ben and David went on it, and I don't usually watch their content, but I watched that, and they happened to say that it was a women and children first.
I think that's really out of context, actually. Right. Okay. I think in terms, it's an old-fashioned muster where you all have to go to your muster station, the lifeboat, all together at the same time, and everyone hears the announcement. So you're lined up on prom deck. But in terms of women and children first, that is a huge exaggeration and out of context. Of course it is, because what they're saying is we'd like shorter people at the front so you can see people fit in life vests. Yeah, nothing about we're going to make sure you escape first or anything like that. Okay, so that's not accurate.
So do you think that you had a better experience than what we did on our classes to Carnival Miracle?
Are you telling me you didn't have a good experience? I'm very surprised to hear that.
Not the best experience.
Well, from what I've read on social media about your experience, I would say yes. I found the ship to be pretty spotless. My cabin was very clean. It was a great sized cabin. It was very beach vibey. I loved all the blues. I like blue, in case you hadn't noticed. So I imagine I had a much better time than you two. I want to get you two on Margaritaville at sea with me. I think it would be a great experience.
Yeah, we said we would. I think we'd have to do it with friends.
Yeah, couldn't do it on my own.
I think if we went on just us two, I think we'd depress one another with the constant whinging and
I think you would as well.
Whereas when you go with a friend, like, you can actually turn like things into a bit of a laugh. And that when we went on Marella Explorer, I mean, we actually had a fantastic time, not because everything was perfect, but because we went with friends, and you're able to just like turn things into a bit of a laugh when you get served something that looks a bit hideous.
Yeah, and I want to get you to line dance with me.
I would do it. He wouldn't.
I'm going to jump to Stephen now. So From Amsterdam to the Canary Islands, there's a lot of protests against cruise tourism growing. This week it has come to light that Norway is the latest country, and they're considering imposing a tax on cruise lines to help reduce cruise ship visits. It's worth mentioning that last year, 5.9 million cruise ship visitors visited Norway. Do you think these concerns are justified? Is there over-tourism taking place in Norway?
Well, Norway's quite a big place when you think, you know, there's so many fjords and everything, but some of the particular ones are small places. And if you ended up like St. Thomas, for instance, with half a dozen ships at any one time, it could be overwhelming. But I must admit, my experience of Norway, I've never had a problem.
But why do you think there's so many Norwegian fjord itineraries, particularly out of Southampton? Because I've noticed, particularly post-pandemic, if you look at cruise itineraries, there's far less Mediterranean sailings, far less Canary Island sailings. A lot of the time I feel like I'm just scrolling through Norwegian fjords and Rotterdam mini cruises.
Well, it's almost certainly because of the cruise lines are trying to reduce their costs of fuel, which is a large part of the cost of running a ship. And certainly as we go forward, the regulations and the expense of fuel is going to increase because there's new legislation coming where the cruise lines are going to have to pay a levy on fuel consumption. And so it's in their interest to try and minimise fuel consumption more than they have done up to now. And the route across the English Channel to Rotterdam or up to Hamburg, up to Norway, is the ideal thing because you can steam relatively slowly to get to these places, and then it short hops overnight to the next port like Bergen and then on to Aalesund and things. So you really are minimising the fuel and minimising that potential extra tax and that's going to be levied before long.
So Jenny, what do you think cruise lines should do differently to respond to the backlash from countries like Norway? Do you think that cruise lines will be prepared to pay the tax, or do you think that cruise lines might start looking at alternative cruise destinations? Could we see back-to-back Rotterdam sailings maybe?
Well, at the end of the day, any type of tax is always going to be passed on to the guests, isn't it? So really what we're looking at is an increase in prices for people who want to go to those destinations. And if people still want to go, obviously people will be willing to pay that. And if they don't, then like you say, there'll be the cheaper options available. So obviously cruising for some people is all about the destinations. They really want to see Norway, and that's the best way to do it. And then for others, they just want to see the ship. They just want to enjoy a nice weekend, and those people will be happy with the back-to-back Rotterdam. So I think it'll still be, there'll still be options for everyone, whatever you want to do.
I think I'd just say that I'm not critical of Norwegian sailings. I think I've done Norway more than most itineraries, and the stunning scenery that you get in Norway is something you don't really tire of or get bored of. But it just seems from our perspective that the market is a bit saturated in Norwegian sailings, and like Rotterdam mini cruises, like they're just so frequent now. I just think it'd be nice if there was just a bit more variety, some new ports maybe.
The big problem is going through the Bow of Biscay to get to the Med, because you've got a long distance where you've basically got to sail at quite a high speed, and that is the problem.
I can't think of a ship that would be able to tackle the Bay of Biscay easily, really.
But do you understand why these people are getting annoyed in these locations from all of these cruise ships coming? These locations over tourism. Do you understand their frustration?
Well, it's a double-edged sword though, because they're getting revenue without the cruise ships coming in. There's going to be a hit on the local economies.
I don't really understand some cruise ports like Amsterdam. It's well known that Amsterdam are really trying to limit cruise ship visits, and I think Rotterdam is going to I think Rotterdam's seeing the benefit of that. But one port where we could see with our own eyes over tourism was Santorini. I mean, when we've both times we visited Santorini, there's like 7 or 8 ships anchored off, and the queues for the tenders was just.
But if you lived in somewhere like that, would you get annoyed?
Well, in answer to your first question, do I understand? I do understand in part. Yeah, when I think about Barcelona, for example, and the saturation of tourists there, I think that does have a negative impact on the locals in terms of prices rising in their own city. People are trying to benefit from all the tourists there, but it also has that knock-on effect with the people who live there as well. Yeah. So I do understand that in part, but I also take your point that it works both ways, doesn't it? I think about some of the ports, and if I think about some of the Caribbean ports, they've actually created whole villages for cruise passengers, and they rely on the arrival of cruise passengers for their economy as well. So it goes both ways. I think it depends on where where countries or cities are imposing these taxes. What are they doing it for? And the reasons seem very different. I think also a lot of UK residents who are up in arms about it forget that there are actually hotel taxes in the UK that have been introduced more recently, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of uproar in our country about that.
No, I agree. So recently, Star of the Seas, which will be the world's biggest cruise ship when she does launch, has recently completed her sea trials. So Stephen, having overseen Queen Mary 2's trials, what exactly is being tested at sea with these ships?
Well, there are normally two sets of sea trials. The first one is for the benefit of the shipyard to set everything up, and then you normally come back into port, dry dock the ship, clean the underwater part, and repaint it so it's got no sort of extra drag from barnacles and growth. And then you go out on the owner's sea trials, and that's when you test everything as far as you're able to. So you do the speed runs to verify the speed. There are certain manoeuvres you have to do, like the turning circles, where you take the data from that, and then you have to post it on the bridge so that the navigating crew, deck officers, know how the ship can react. You've got to do a crash stop, so you know how quickly the ship stops and things like that. So there's all that sort of thing. You test the anchoring equipment, everything you can, but the big thing is that you're unable to really test fully the air conditioning until you've got a full load of passengers on board. So that's only really during the first few cruises that the air conditioning gets balanced and sorted out. But the most onerous test, certainly during the owner's sea trials, is the endurance test, where you have to run the ship at full power for 8 hours without anything going wrong.
Wow.
And certainly one of the ships, I can't remember which one it was, but one of them we did 7 hours, 50 minutes, and something tripped and the speed came down and we had to do the whole thing again.
Wow.
And of course that's a huge expense to the shipyard because you're out for an extra 8 hours with all the trials crew on board, plus you've got the fuel cost, which is all down to the shipyard before the ship's handed over.
I was going to ask you, what is the biggest challenge during the sea trials? Would you say that is the endurance test?
Yeah, that's the most onerous test, because everything on the ship, the propulsion system, the catering, you've got air conditioning that with the people that you've got on, everything has to work flawlessly within that 8-hour period to prove that the ship's ready to enter service.
I apologise if this comes across as very ignorant, but in terms of the endurance testing, how a lot of these ships, I'm assuming, don't actually sail through very rough seas or large swells during this test. So how do you know how they're going to fare in those kind of conditions?
Well, you would have done model tests at an institute. When I was doing Queen Mary, most of the model tests were physical models, different sizes. Nowadays, you can do a lot by computer, but you end up at the end doing a few model tests. But we did model tests where we took satellite data for a 5-year period, and we ran the Queen Mary 2 across the Atlantic, east and west, sailing every day for that 5-year period with the weather to assess whether or not the ship would ever be late arriving in New York or Southampton. And that's how we gave confidence to Cunard that the ship would be able to perform.
I feel like I've been schooled by Stephen Payne, and it's given me all the feels.
And I'm not one to plug a magazine, but you did do a rather splendid piece in the last issue about Marin, didn't you?
About Marin, which is the Dutch Hydrodynamic Institute, which most of the shipyards building passenger ships tend to use Marin for their model test.
So what could go horribly wrong in a sea trial that might delay a ship's debut? Was there anything that particularly went wrong with Queen Mary 2?
Well, we lost a bow thruster door.
Oh.
Queen Mary 2 is unique, and she followed the practice of QE2, and yet the bow thrusters have doors, or had doors, on them. And the idea was that originally the service speed of the ship was going to be 26.5 knots. And if you've got these great big openings, and you think these thruster openings are 3 or 4 meters in diameter, creates a lot of turbulence, a lot of drag. So to minimize the resistance as much as possible, I had them fit butterfly type doors. And when we were testing the thrusters, one of the doors was closed and the thruster started, and the interlock hadn't been fully calibrated, and we blew the door off.
She hasn't got the bow thruster doors now?
No, in a recent refit, because she now operates at a slower speed, they've taken the doors off.
What's something cruise passengers never appreciate about a ship's design? Like something technical?
Cruise passengers are always very critical.
No.
You know, why?
No.
Why is this here and why is that? And to give you, one example on Queen Mary 2, we have the Lido buffet, which is King's Court on Queen Mary 2 on deck 7. So it's in the middle of the ship. And so many people have said to me, why isn't it at the top of the ship where every other passenger ship has the Lido restaurant? Well, the problem was that to get the number of balconies we needed to justify the huge expense of Queen Mary 2, I had to put the main public rooms low down in the ship.
Right.
Then we started the first rows of balcony cabins within the hull. And then you've got the boat deck. And what I wanted to do was have the ability to muster the passengers inside the ship rather than on the open deck, because the transatlantic liner, in bad weather, if you ever have to muster the passengers, to get them out on the open deck in the weather and everything, I just didn't want that. So I needed a string of public spaces where I could muster the passengers. Yeah. And the only one that was still available was basically the Lido restaurant, King's Court. So that's why that's there, because that's where we muster the passengers. And in fact, even Mickey Harrison, questioned me, and he said, I'm not really so clear that this will work. But we put in an extra staircase at the end of deck 7 that would go up to deck 8 where the main pool was. And that was specifically to fulfill the aim of people who wanted to have a quick snack and wanted to get back to the pool.
Set sail and hear from ambassadors and Dorca's CEO in partnership with Sail Away magazine.
Has there ever been a moment where you're like, whatever you're working on, you've decided this isn't going to work, scrap it, move on?
No. No, again, Queen Mary 2 is the first design that I put forward to Carnival. Didn't have the number of balconies that would justify building the ship. So that's when because I had the 2 public room decks and the Lido all together. So it would have been 3 public room decks with cabins below and cabins above. And when Carnival did the sums about the revenue and said, no, you need more balcony cabins, that's when I had to redesign the ship. But no, we call it a design spiral, where you do the first design, you critique it in all aspects, and then you revise it, and gradually it gets better and better until you end up in the middle, basically, and we call that the design spiral.
Jenny, Cunard isn't the most family-friendly line. I don't think, I'm a massive fan of Queen Mary 2, but I don't think I'd necessarily recommend it to families. In your opinion, what is the best cruise line for families? Like, speaking personally.
So I think every family is different. So what's the best cruise line for a family with toddlers is not necessarily the best for a family with teenagers. You've also got to factor in the cost. Would you like to have 3 cruises over the course of the year with your family, or do you just want the one and it to be, a fantastic experience? But all things considered, my favourite has to be Disney. And that's not because I'm a Disney person. I'm not.
I mean, I know you're. I love Disney as well. So,
and I know a lot of people are well into Disney, aren't they? And they love the parks and they love the movies. And personally, I'm not. That's not particularly why I love Disney. I just think that it's unbeatable in terms of the service, the food, just the atmosphere on board. I just think it's really, really special.
But can you justify that cost for Disney, though, for the pair of you? Because you've both cruised with Disney. That cost is so high, and I know they can charge it because they're Disney, but is it worth it?
I'm taking another Disney cruise this August.
Okay.
We took one last year as well. And we're taking a 5-night cruise, and it's around the same price as we would spend on a 14-night cruise on a different cruise line.
A lot of money.
It's a lot of money, but I suppose, especially when you think about the American market and how little time they get off work, they might only have 2 weeks annual leave. So for them, I can totally see why people are willing to pay 2-3 times what they would for another cruise.
I think it's a lot of money, no doubt about that. Do I think the quality is there? Absolutely. I have not booked any of the UK sailings, having said that, because I think they are extortionate. What I did was I booked a Disney cruise out of America, and my flights plus the cruise itself and accommodation prior to that still came to less than sailing out of the UK. So I've done it a little bit differently.
Do you two think that me and Jay would like Disney? We've never done it, and we've never done it because it's so expensive and we think we can do other things, but also the kids element. Do you think
I think if you went on with friends and you made the most of the fantastic adults-only areas and facilities, I think I could convince you.
Do you think?
Yeah, so when last year we went on transatlantic Disney cruise, which is one way to make it more affordable. The transatlantics generally are a little bit cheaper. But I was quite surprised to find that probably 80% of guests on there were without children.
Really?
Yeah.
That surprises me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's another thing that does stop us, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I've said, would we not look a bit weird going on there without
children? Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I went on my own
You do as well.
as an adult male without children.
I remember Gary Bembridge told
He did
us
it, yeah.
that when he went on Disney, there was parts of his cruise where he felt quite uncomfortable and a bit out of place on there as like an older man on there without children.
The thing is, there are so many places on the ship that are adults only. So you've got the adults only pool area, the cafe, there's a nightclub,
a restaurant as well.
Restaurants, the specialty restaurants. So you could, if you wanted to, never see a child.
So could I go on though and not see a Mickey Mouse? Could I go on there and escape the mouse?
Yeah, 100%.
The mouse is normally there for sail away, out on deck, and in the atrium as well. They do meet and greets.
It's not shoveled down my throat. It's not. Okay.
If you want to see Mickey, you need to know where to be and what time.
Do they charge you?
No.
Okay, so that element is included. All right, fine.
And I should think of transatlantic as well. You probably get less kids on a transatlantic X-way.
Another family-orientated cruise line is MSC. They're a little bit cheaper. There was recently a sad incident on MSC Virtuosa where a man sadly died following an altercation.
I was on the subsequent sailing and it was as if nothing had happened, and I don't think a lot of passengers on my cruise realised what had happened. I only knew because I received about 300 messages from people telling me someone's died on your cruise. I'm like, no, they haven't. It was on the previous one. There's all sorts of information. But I don't know how it was dealt with, but I believe it was dealt with very swiftly with a smaller number of people involved, and they made a conscious decision to not reveal the information or what had happened to the wider audience, the passengers. I think some people felt that was the wrong thing to do. I felt it was the correct thing to do. I think revealing that kind of information as you begin, you're 2 hours into a cruise, could cause all sorts of panic and speculation, which happened eventually anyway. But I don't really know the ins and outs of how that was dealt with.
So that mood after that, what you're saying, that mood on board was no different to what a normal sailing would be.
No, I mean, even on that particular cruise, I don't think 99.9% of passengers knew about it. And certainly on our cruise, they didn't. It was just information was filtering through slowly on social media.
I mean, I saw there was quite a few people online, particularly on Facebook groups, that were saying that MSC should have addressed it, but it is still an ongoing investigation. So I don't think it would have been fair for MSC to start broadcasting details of what had happened.
And semantics are everything, you know. Did someone die? Were they killed? Was it murder, manslaughter? They all mean very different things. And people are throwing those words around as if they meant nothing. Yeah. And of course they meant something, and they meant something to this person's family.
When a situation like this happens, what do you think would be the procedure? Do you think they're confined to their cabin?
The early carnival ships that I was involved with, we had a brig.
Oh.
And then I think by the time we got to the fantasy class, the need for the brig was dispensed with, and passengers that needed, to be constrained that were kept in their cabins.
Let's start talking about why we got you here. So all three of you are guests on the CEO cruise that we're hosting on Ambassador's Ambience, and the purpose of that sailing is to help raise funds and awareness for ORCA and showcase their vital work in action with onboard conservationists. From what you know about this sailing, what do you think makes it unique?
I'm just particularly excited to have the opportunity to sail with the CEO of Ambassador Cruise Line and also the CEO of ORCA as well. So I'm expecting some really interesting talks from people on the stage and to get a real insight into Ambassador Cruise Line and ORCA as well.
Yeah. It's quite uncommon that you get a CEO do a cruise with their passengers and open themselves up quite vulnerably.
We suggested it to P&O, but they ignored that. So they didn't know what's going on there.
I think it shows a level of confidence, certainly, in a brand, and also a level of transparency that you don't often find with a CEO.
No, I mean, we've invited quite a few CEOs, and there's a lot of, we're not sure, because they know the sort of questions we ask. When we approached Ambassador, I mean, it was an instant yes. And when he came here, yes, he'd been made aware of the questions beforehand, but there wasn't a single question that he said, no, there's nothing there that I'm not prepared to answer. Even when I started talking about CMV, which I thought might be a bit of a sensitive topic, but he's very Christian, he's very, very down to earth. And having sailed on Ambition and Ambience a couple of times, it's very unusual the amount of respect that passengers have for him, the way he goes around the ship and he introduces himself to everyone. Jamie, you have sailed on Ambition. I know
where this is going.
So talk to us. Like, you didn't have. There were areas which.
Let's be honest, I had a mixed experience, and that is very well documented. Yeah, and the thing is, I've had mixed experiences on various cruise lines. Sometimes I've had a great cruise on one ship. I've gone back on board the same ship a year later, and it's been mediocre at best. Yeah. But the thing is, I feel like once I've allowed a little bit of distance between, let's say, a mixed experience, I'm fine to go back on board. People keep telling me, you need to go back on board and give it another try. You have been very convincing. And I concur with what Jenny said about some of the events that will be taking place that I'm really looking forward to. I feel like it's going to be a really immersive cultural experience as well as just a cruise. I also get to sail with you lovely people, which I'm really looking forward to. The itinerary is just fantastic. It's got some of, I think, the best ports in the world to visit, which I'm really excited about. And that time of year, I don't know, I might see the Northern Lights.
We can hope.
I just think there's so much going on, and all the Q&As as well that passengers will be able to be a part of. It's just, I think it's very exciting, and I am genuinely looking forward to meeting those CEOs, but also spending time with you fine people.
I mean, I also have to give recognition to how Ambassador handle marketing, because there's certain cruise lines out there, if you dare say anything remotely negative, that's it. Bridge burn, you're finished, you'll never be invited to a press trip again. Ambassador were aware of the problems that you had on board, and when we had our conversations about the CEO cruise and the people that we wanted to be on there with us, there was no, oh no, we don't want Jamie because he had a bad time. It was more, no, we want Jamie to come back on board and see what we can do and what we do offer. And I think that's a much more grown up way to deal with.
And I hope they don't think I had a bad time. It was a mixed time.
Yeah.
But you know the way I operate, I film everything. And if it's going very well, that's what people will see in the vlogs. And if there are things that aren't going so well, I won't hide that in the vlogs either.
So as our viewers and listeners probably know, we don't typically do vlogs, so I'm assuming we'll be in yours quite a bit.
I would love to think that all four of you would appear at some point, but I would understand if you didn't want to. I'm not for everyone, I get that.
Well, I think as part of what we've got organised, you're actually going to do a Q&A with us, which we've never done
ever.
As
before.
in of you.
Yeah,
you can ask
in the
anything.
theatre. The ambassador is still deciding whether it needs to have a certificate rating or not.
So instead of Sail Away Uncensored, we're going to have Unhinged with Travelodgy.
Yeah. So, Stephen, you have not been on Ambassador.
No.
What are you looking forward to that cruise?
She's an older ship.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that, firstly, to see how well they maintain the ship and how they have got the reputation that they've got. But a lot of the modern ships, to me, just look very much, the interiors look like an airport terminal or a shopping mall. And it's the older ships that came on that have still got some of the traits from the liners, which to me, I enjoy travelling on ships like that, the older ships, and so that for me is going to be very interesting.
I think on the ship, she's got some beautiful bars and lounges.
The lounges and the restaurants on Ambience, I think, are nicer than Ambition. I can understand, like, when we go on a cruise, especially when we went on Ambience, we try and talk to quite a lot of passengers, try and get their opinion and feel of the ship. And I can't recall a ship that we've done in the last couple of years where people have such affection for her. And we actually said in our review, someone said something along the lines of, look, we know she's not perfect, but it's her imperfections which make her special. And people go back time and time again because it's almost like going home.
But she also feels quite spacious. She doesn't feel crowded. She doesn't. I mean, she's got really high deck head.
Her passenger space ratio, I think, off the top of my head, is 50.2 cubic feet per passenger.
Well, again, it's a throwback from she was those two ships, the Crown and the Regal, originally were the first ships, new builds for Princess out of Fincantieri.
But I know that a lot of people, especially first-time cruises, when they're booking, they don't give a stuff about passenger space ratio. But we've done enough ships to know that it really does make a difference. And, you know, it's just nice to go on holiday and not have to queue for absolutely everything and feel like you can never get a seat in a bar. It's very, very impressive to see that Ambassador are building up this loyal following. During the CEO cruise, guests will have a chance to participate in live Q&As. You're doing one with us, we're doing one with you. Stephen, we'll be doing a Q&A with you whilst on board. You're also going to be doing a number of different lectures. What are you going to be talking about in those lectures?
One of the most important things is obviously the sustainability of the cruise industry, especially in this environment that we have about reducing emissions and impact on the environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical side of how the cruise industry and the marine industry are reducing emissions, making things more efficient. And then, in view of the area where we're travelling, Norway has a rich history, especially in the Second World War. You think the Bismarck, German battleship, when she left Germany, her first port, or the only port after leaving Germany, was Bergen. We're going to talk a little bit about the German Navy in the Second World War, Bergen, and also Tromsø, which is where the Bismarck sister ship was sunk, the Tirpitz. So we're going to talk a bit about that and the history of the battleship.
Do you have a favourite port, the three of you, that you're going to go to on this sailing?
I would say Tromsø and Alta.
So I'm really looking forward to Invergordon because I'm a little bit ashamed to say, but I've never been to Scotland.
No, we haven't either.
We've been all over the world. But
that makes me feel better.
We've never been to
never done it.
All Wales.
No.
Oh, you've not been to Wales
No.
either? Oh, wow.
No.
Yes, I think especially because, you know, being from the north of England, Scotland's like right there. I don't know why I've never been.
What about you, Stephen?
No, Tromsø.
Tromsø.
Yeah. There's a museum outside Tromsø dedicated to Tirpitz. So
you like a museum, don't you?
I do. So I shall Yeah, go along there.
Very nice.
And with your Q&A, passengers on board are going to have an opportunity to ask you pretty much anything. I dare say there's going to be quite a few questions about Queen Mary 2.
I know a bit about
Queen Mary 2 is probably one of the only ships I've ever seen that has the half deck. What's the reason for that?
Why did I put those half decks? There were a lot of people, they are unique. And the reason is, in the Britannia restaurant, I positioned the restaurant at the place where there's the least motion of the ship, because I wanted to make sure that on the rough Atlantic, when it was rough, people eating in that dining room wouldn't feel the motion so much. The problem was that the position of it meant that we needed a bar in front, so you've got the chart room and you've got the pub ahead of it. Behind, we have the Queen's room, so when there's a big cocktail party before dinner, people can go that way. The problem is you've got to get through the restaurant to the Queen's room, and I didn't want people going through. And you could have said, okay, well, you could have made 2 passages along, but it would have reduced the capacity of the restaurant. And I was adamant that I wanted to ensure that on 2 sittings we could accommodate all the Britannia passengers in the restaurant, that they wouldn't have to go to the Lido or something like that. The same thing with the forward decks past the Royal Court Theatre up to the illuminations, the planetarium and lecture. It was to give us the capacity in the Royal Court Theatre to enable everybody to have a chance of seeing the shows within the 2 sittings. So that's the reason. They're all the quirky things, they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's no such thing as a perfect ship. It's a compromise, and I had to make various compromises, and these are some of the things that came out.
Jamie, you have cruised solo and in groups. Do you think a theme cruise like this makes it easier to meet people?
I think most cruise lines and ships are actually they enable people to cruise solo. I think nearly all of them offer something, whether it's the types of cabins, whether it's the group meets. You know, there are some cruise lines that actually deliver letters to your cabin as a solo passenger welcoming you, saying we understand you're a solo passenger, and they invite you to different venues. You don't even have to look at a program, for example. I think a theme cruise absolutely could lend itself very well to solo passengers, and I'm hoping, even though I know you, I am traveling as a solo person, so I'm hoping that people out there who are considering sailing this understand that there will be a lot of solo passengers, there'll be lots of opportunities to meet up. But I think also knowing that there are people from media there and actually wanting people to have the best time possible, and listening to you talk about design actually, and talking about passenger convenience and comfort, which I don't actually hear a lot of these days, if I'm honest with you. I feel like that's what this whole cruise is going to be about, an immersive experience. So I think there will be ample opportunities for solo passengers.
So more so for you this next question, but also for the 3 of you to answer though, but what do you think really makes a cruise ship truly solo friendly then?
Well, first of all, semantics. Don't call us single. I'm married. That absolutely winds me up beyond anything. Is when we're called single passengers. The supplements, you know, I appreciate those cruise lines that, even if it's just in the launch weeks of new itineraries, actually, like Fred Olsen, for example, will say you won't have to pay a supplement. You do have to book within the first, let's say, 4 weeks, however. Just some recognition that actually we get fleeced. And I understand we take up sometimes more room as well as solo passengers, so I get both sides. But just to have that acknowledged, I've sailed on some cruise lines where it's not mentioned in a program that there will be solo meetups, and I think that's unacceptable in this day and age. I'm actually writing an article for your next edition about the curse of the solo passenger, so I don't want to give too much away in terms of statistics and how important solo travel is to the industry, because I will reveal that later. I feel it's just a case of being recognised and valued, and that is lacking on some cruise lines.
Thing about solo cabins is interesting, because when we were doing Queen Mary 2, Cunard wanted a number of single solo cabins, and Carnival said, no, we have double cabins that we'll sell as singles. And the rationale was that most of the cabins on board the ships today are prefabricated and assembled ashore, certainly the way they build them in France. And because you're building perhaps 1,300 cabins the same, there's a unit price for that double cabin. Having single cabins is going to disproportionately increase the cost. And so the attitude was, we just install the double cabins and we just sell the one bed within that cabin. That was the reason. Of course, since then, Kahn or Cunard have made the argument that they needed single cabin, so they've been retrofitted as space has been made available, and they've taken like part of the casino away. So, but that's the reason the ship wasn't built with single cabins.
I've taken my fair share of cruises by myself, and I think that there's one thing that cruise lines can do to make the experience so much better for solo travellers, and it costs them nothing, and that's just to be mindful of the dinner arrangements. So the best example was I was on a Costa cruise, and I was seated at a table with 5 other solo travellers, who were all women, all from the UK. The next table was 6 male solo travellers from the UK. Another table had, solo travellers from different countries. Just to put that thought into it meant that we all had a brilliant time. The 6 of us would then see each other around the ship. We'd meet up in the bar. It was fantastic. Then on the other hand, last month I went on a Cunard cruise by myself, and I was seated at a table for 8 and nobody else showed up. And they didn't offer to sit me at another table. They just said, do you want to wait for people? And I said, well, I'm a solo traveller, I'm by myself, so I'm not particularly waiting for anyone. They were like, okay, well, do you want to wait or do you want your food? And I was like, well, this is such an awkward experience being at this massive table by myself. And that could have been easily fixed by just,
it's just putting the thought in.
Just the thought. It doesn't cost them anything. And that makes a massive difference, I think.
I would really like it, though, if more cruise lines could just show a little bit more thought for solo passengers when building new ships. And this is one of the areas I have a lot of respect for Virgin, because they've got their small single cabins. I know they're tiny, but
it's not a single cabin, it's a solo.
Sorry,
cider.
Thank you, Jamie. You're going to change that.
You're going to wind me up.
They've got their solo cabins, but one of the differences for the crew on Virgin, and the reason the crew on Virgin ships are so happy, is because everyone gets their own cabin. And having worked at sea, I cannot stress enough the difference that makes. Like, that is the best perk in the world, like knowing that you've got your own privacy. Yes, I remember when Scarlet Lady first come out, there was some negative publicity saying how small the crew cabins were. I know every crew member, or at least all the crew members I've ever met, would much prefer to have a tiny cabin to themselves as opposed to sharing it with 2, 3 or 4 people. So I do think other cruise lines could learn a lot from Virgin.
When I started in the business 1985, the norm was 2 per cabin without any facilities. You had to go to communal facilities. And then sometime later there was 2 crew cabins with a shared toilet. But Queen Mary 2 was the first passenger ship where every crew cabin had its private facilities.
Oh, wow.
And I put that in specifically knowing that the transatlantic Southampton and New York are the busiest days, the turnaround day, and a lot of the staff don't get the opportunity to get off the ship. And so I wanted to give them the best experience possible by having facilities in every cabin. And we've also got twice the number of crew public spaces on board Queen Mary 2 to give them the opportunity to maximise, when they do get time off, what they do.
She's a great ship, isn't she?
You may think that, but I could possibly comment.
Just before we move on, so if anyone watching or listening is interested in coming on the CEO cruise and wanting to support our fundraising efforts, and of course meet you guys, there is a discount code that we can offer, which is SailAway5, where people can get 5% off this cruise or any ambassador sailing. It's worth mentioning. So go and have a look. We've got a web page on our website, which we'll put in the banner in the top right-hand corner, and hope to see you. So we're always the ones asking the questions. On the way over here, we messaged all 3 of you saying, you can ask us absolutely anything.
We need to get used to people asking us questions because we're going to have it on the cruise.
So I'd just like to say that I love what you do with Sail Away, in particular how it's different to anything else that's out there. You know, how you have the paper magazine, which isn't just a glossy brochure, is it? It's real people's opinions. I love that. Even having a real podcast studio where most of the podcasts are kind of online. And I love the traditional approach that you're taking, which is going in a different direction to probably what a lot of people are going in with, how, you know, AI is making content creation faster and faster and maybe less real. So with that in mind, I just wanted to ask, what are your plans for the future? So where do you see Sail Away going over the next 5 years? And how do you think that the changing landscape with AI might impact you in the future?
The future, I'd like us to keep growing, and I think we will. I think it's easy for people to say that people are not interested in print media anymore. I don't believe that's the case. I think it's all about the content, and it's our perception that a lot of publications out there they're just brochures, really. We try and find the most interesting stories. We speak to real people, and that approach seems to be working. Now, we have had people, including cruise lines, say that we're working against the cruise industry. There's certain cruise line PR departments, which I'll leave people to guess who they are, that believe that because we're happy to call out negatives, that means that we're not advocates for the cruise industry, or we're supporting what they're doing. That's a load of rubbish. We are advocates for the cruise industry, but we stand for paying passengers. Like, cruises are not cheap, and we're a great believer that people should get what they paid for. It is a unfortunate reality that some publications are prepared to ignore negative stories with regards to some cruise lines because they're too scared of losing advertising, or they're not going to get invited to press trips and things like that.
I'm not bothered.
I'm really not bothered. If they don't invite us to press trips, then we'll find a writer that has, and we'll get their perspective. I think some people have a habit of saying that we're overly harsh or overly negative. If that's the case, then apologies. Our approach is intended to be balanced. And I don't think there's ever been a ship that we've been on where we've said that it was an entirely flawless experience.
Good and bad.
To quote what you said, Stephen, there's no such thing as a perfect ship. Exactly. And I do think some cruise lines need to actually realise this. Like, if you're calling out a cabin because there's no drawers in it, you know, I'm just being honest. Like, I have drawers in my bedroom at home because it makes the bedroom practical. So when we go into a cruise ship cabin and there's not a single drawer in it, we do scratch our heads. But I'm a great believer in honesty and balance, and I think influencers and publications should always be honest and not be scared that they're going to start losing out on press trips and things like that, because we've got our fair share of press trips over the years, but it's about finding the right cruise line. There's certain cruise lines we work with, like Fred Olsen, like Ambassador, like Holland America, where they've got enough confidence in their own brand and what they're offering to be like, yeah, come on, do a balanced review, do your thing. But there's other cruise lines out there that are only expecting positive coverage, and they're obviously not going to like us.
I see, and other people see, who are reading your magazine, which cruise lines are involved, which are happy to work with you. And I do stand by what I said earlier. That shows a confidence in brand, but also they're willing to continue to evolve and to learn. And it's very stark to me which cruise lines aren't currently involved, and I wonder why that is. What are they hiding? What are they hiding?
So, touching on the AI thing you said, though, AI fascinates me. I am so interested in AI, and I'm so worried about AI. I think it's a great tool to help. You know, I will openly say, yeah, I would use an AI tool to help me fact check something, or go and find me where that article came from, or whatever it might be. But when it comes to content creation is where it's really starting to worry me, actually. Like, I'll go on Instagram now or TikTok, and I will see a fake ship crashing into an iceberg, and all the comments like, oh my god, this is awful, and you can clearly see it's AI, but then people will come and they're like, that's fake.
I was concerned about the pubes, if I'm honest.
But all the Someone really commented though and said, "Oh, that's fake. You brought that in your suitcase." But yet they will believe all this fake content that is clearly AI generated, and it really worries me for like that blurred line between what people will believe and not believe.
Cruise purists, though, you cannot say anything negative about their favourite cruise line. It's not true, is it?
Look, there are loyalists out there for any cruise line. Stephen, Cunard has loyalists, P&O have loyalists, MSC have loyalists. And yeah, all right, as in our job, as all of us do, giving our honest opinion, people don't like that. We've had people comment on our stuff and say, "Oh, I had a really good time though." Great. I'm so pleased for you. I genuinely am. You spent your hard-earned money. You had a good time. I'm so pleased for you. I didn't, or this is what I found. But AI, no, that really scares me, and I don't know what the future will look like. I know we have to label things now with AI, but I see so much. Yeah. Does it worry you three?
Well, I fall into a category now that requires me to have training on AI in terms of my age, so I just keep away from it, if I'm honest with you. It terrifies me to the point that I have nothing to do with it.
It can be good and bad, and it obviously depends how people use it. And if it's the case of something, using tools that means that you can do a better job in less time, then I'm all for it. But it does worry me that we're getting to the stage where we can't tell what's real and what's not real, and particularly with the video aspect of it. And it could be the case that I know how long it takes to do something like a YouTube video, like a vlog. We're talking weeks of work for each video, and if people can be churning out hundreds of those in a day, it could lead to real content getting buried and people turning away from YouTube because it's there's an influx of all of this fake content and they can't tell the difference.
They won't go to the difference. So
dilutes reality.
It really does dilute the reality, and it's somewhat cheating. I think when there's people like us that put in so much hard work and effort into what we create and do. I mean, touching on that, like we've had recently in the last week or two, people steal our footage. They will go on and screen record drone shots of ours, like
and then it's an AI voiceover,
a voiceover to do that video, and then we'll say to them like, "That's ours. Either credit us or take it down." They're like, "Oh, well, it's the fair use policy," and I'm like, "No, but what they've done is blurred out our logo on it." So that's that.
As I said in defence, I'm not sure how it's fair use by screen recording 60% of our Celebrity Apex full ship tour, uploading it into their video, the ultimate Celebrity Apex ship tour, and then claiming it as their own. I don't see how that's fair use.
The next step, though, which is more worrying, is that people will be able to do that, but then use the AI to change it slightly. Distort it so that you can't tell it's yours, YouTube can't tell it's yours, and they'll be doing the exact same thing.
Well, do you know what? The funny thing is the only reason I found them was pure luck. Get 50% off your first order when you subscribe to Sail Away magazine. Get the digital version for £3.95 and the printed edition for £6.95 every 2 months. Subscribe today at sailawaymagazine.com.
Given you're acknowledged as cruise experts, if a group of investors were to come to you and say, "Look, we want you to set up a cruise line and run the cruise line," would you be happy to do so? And where would you target? What would be your niche?
That's a great question. I think I know what you're going to say.
For me, it would be luxury. Because we believe in service. I don't like the direction that a lot of mainstream cruise lines are going in, where it's all economies of scale and trying to cut onboard costs and reducing revenue. I don't like it. And I feel that there is this attitude of just pleasing shareholders and maximising profit. I think you can be a successful business person without obsessing on profit for every little thing. I would love to oversee the creation of a luxury line that actually does things properly.
I think my attitude would be somewhat similar to Royal Caribbean groups, where recently in the news they are doing a complete refit, or they're redoing the Solstice class, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're going to be making them more modern, and that attitude of like, no expense spared, let's just do it for the sake of it for the passengers. That's the attitude I think I would.
250 per
That's what it's a lot of money that they're finding, because they truly believe in it and they want that experience for their passengers.
It's that attitude that we have so much respect for, and I think that this is a clear difference between Royal Caribbean Group and Carnival, in our opinion. Like, I think with Royal Caribbean Group, it's an attitude of no expense spared. Like, we're going to invest all this money and we're going to make our ships the best. Whereas it feels to me that when there's a Carnival ship that goes in for a refit, it's a very, very lax job. They've done the bare minimum. They've put a bit of paint on here and there. They've put some new carpet down. But
there's attitude on the Carnival as well, though. Carnival Corp, when they do their ships, like when we went on Carnival Miracle, they had they had a nightclub on there which was 2 decks high. They got rid of the lower half to fill it with cabins because they needed to make back that money for the refit. That's their attitude. It's like, where can I get that extra revenue for that refit? Whereas at Royal Caribbean Group, I'm assuming it's like, well, let's just do it because we know that passengers will come on and just like it and then come back again.
I mean, they're truly revitalising their Solstice class. Yeah. I mean, those ships are going to look entirely different once they've invested that level of money. Like when we went on Navigator of the Seas, she'd had an enormous refit when we went on her. And she felt like in many parts of the ship, like she felt like a new ship. She didn't feel like a ship that was more than 20 years old.
But no, your answer is we would no expense spared, and we would make it a luxury line.
Be a hard sell though.
It would be a hard
for the investors.
It would, and but I am a great believer in reputation as well. I don't think that it should all be just focusing on profit.
As you know, Stephen, when we've had discussions before about cruise selling their cabins, it's always the top suites that sell out first.
Oh yeah,
typically. So I would have no worry of selling a luxury cruise line. I know that there's people out there that would spend the money.
And after all, that's what MSC have done, haven't they?
Yeah, Yacht Club, they always sell out first. So it clearly it works, and there's people out there that want to spend that money.
And I feel that there's certain cruise lines in the UK market where there's a lot of old school cruisers and people like us who are a bit old before our time that do appreciate good service and all the heritage that comes with ocean travel. Yeah, quality. And that are prepared to pay a premium, and they're a bit lost at the moment. They're feeling a little bit homeless and not knowing where to go because the cruise line that they used to travel with isn't offering what they used to. What have you?
Oh, I feel like I'm going to bring this down to gutter level. I'm really sorry, but a lot of people out there will have read your article yesterday with regards to a PR team or person who contacted you. And in your words, I think you said they were trying to scare you because of an article or some articles you've recently published about either a cruise ship or a cruise line. I don't know, because you've been vague. Sorry to say that. But those of us who are very nosy, and people who've actually messaged me today already knowing I'm coming here, have said, will you ask them the following? I'm like, I don't do that, but I'm going to. So people want to know who you're referring to, but also when you say scared you, what does that actually entail? What did they do to try to, it sounds like, intimidate you or to stop you from speaking your truth? I
won't say the cruise line. I feel like if someone reads enough of our content or they watches our videos, they know that there's. I'm going to leave it to their imagination. But yes, we did receive a phone call on Friday out of the blue from the top PR position at this cruise line. And I don't really understand the point of the phone call. And I do think it was trying to scare us into silence because there was no attempt at correcting anything that we've said. They said there was no indication that we'd made a slight mistake in our article or something we'd said in our videos. It really was to say we don't like the attitude towards our cruise line and the way you've covered a particular topic. And they did mention that their legal team are monitoring closely everything that we're doing. I don't think there's anything that we've done or said that there's any grounds on a legal basis to actually take action, because we make sure that everything we publish is absolutely watertight.
Is it the case that if you have created an article or somebody has written for you and there's an accuracy, a cruise line might contact you and you would be happy to?
Yeah. Oh God. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be something wrong.
That would be the first. Yeah. But just to be clear, that has never ever happened. The only time a cruise line has ever reached out to us is when we did a story and they asked, could we please provide this comment, and we added it straight away. If there is, if a cruise line ever got reached out to us and said, look, what you've said here isn't quite accurate, can you change it? That is pretty normal. And then we'd put out a correction on social media. That's completely normal. But this conversation was really almost a rant to say that they don't really like our coverage and they didn't feel that we were objective in our journalism. And when we turned around and said that we're an independent cruise magazine, and we're standing up for passengers, and we'd had hundreds of people complaining about recent negative events at this particular cruise line. They kind of just ignored what I was saying. It was like they were a programmed robot. And when I said to them, can I ask, do you think that your attitude from a customer service perspective towards these events has been in any way acceptable? They turned around and said, yes, absolutely. We know we've handled these situations in an excellent manner. Well, at that point, I said that they were utterly deluded. And the phone call went
uncensored,
not
right
long
here.
after.
Uncensored and unbothered.
The Sail Away Uncensored Cruise podcast.